Welcome back to another edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. It is Thursday, April 24th. I'm Tim O'Malley, joined by Drew Mentalk of Irish Illustrated and John Bryce of Football Scoop. And guys, it is draft day for 32 college football players. We will get to that a little later in this segment because the expectation, I think, is that Notre Dame's best will be going on Friday on day two. Turn our attention first to yesterday's spring wrap-up with Marcus Freeman. He touched on, among other things, I think in order it was quarterbacks, and then some injuries and the line issues. JB, I see you are still at the Superdome after Notre Dame's victory over Georgia. You want to take it away here for the first part?
Sure, absolutely. And scavenging lights. So they didn't want to leave the lights on for me, but fortunately I
Well, you're
have.
kicked out of some press boxes in 1 hour, so it's good that you've been able to stay there for 4 months. That's nice.
Oh, yeah, there you go. And fortunately, I've got this pretty stellar photo that I took as a solid backdrop for today's podcast. It's a little dark, but anyway, yeah, very interesting commentary from Marcus Freeman, especially as it pertained to the quarterbacks. I thought there might be a little more discussion about how things went down with Steve Angeli and him leaving, several days before Notre Dame wrapped its spring camp. But again, I was not there in person. I am traveling this week, and so I couldn't be there in person. My schedule was set up before Notre Dame had announced that Marcus would be visiting with the media on that Wednesday, which is why both Pete and I were not there. But I thought more candor from Marcus. We've all said we'll go back to that April 5th Saturday open practice when Marcus said afterwards that it would be incredibly difficult to carry a three-man battle into the fall. And as we've all talked to people, I know I shared a little bit of this earlier in the week, but as we've all talked to people around the program, it's been clear that Steve Angeli didn't lose the job this spring, but he did absolutely nothing to make himself the stakeholder as even the favorite to go into the offseason. And I think that's significant. And so he's waited this long. He's the guy that can be a graduate transfer now and go get paid. And that's what he's going to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was significant after he announced he was leaving. Like he's getting his degree. So if you're kind of in that position where you're not, feeling strong about being the guy, why would you hang around? And I also think it was interesting, Marcus Freeman kind of further elaborating on his comments that he wanted a two quarterback battle going into fall camp and really talking about, especially since, for sure that would be between one or two guys that don't have the experience. Like you can add that pressure element to practices because they know they can't have a bad day, they can't have a bad series because the other guy might kind of pull away that day too. So I thought that was really interesting on maybe clarifying why a two quarterback battle will be so important in addition to just like you want to focus on two guys getting reps rather than having a guy who might, I think even in the practice we saw, like if you got on the field, one of the quarterbacks did, and you had a bad series or you ran the ball twice and then had third and long and didn't do much, like you were kind of off the field potentially a little quicker, and then you're not getting the work that the other guys are. So really dropping it down to two kind of lets them even that out and really put the pressure on them.
And Coach Freeman obviously gave us 4 months of discussion on which one of the two quarterbacks. But interestingly enough, Steve Angeli did not walk on senior day for Notre Dame, graduating early. And he'll get to come on senior day this year because the official news broke. We figured he would be going to Syracuse. He's going to play for Syracuse. They play Notre Dame on senior day. Jaden Mickey comes to South Bend too. Prior to that, Boise State. I think a few more people, JB, will have their eyes on the Angeli return rather than the Mickey return in Boise State. But it gets interesting when you figured there was a chance he would go to a Notre Dame opponent because Purdue was mentioned. I shouldn't say mentioned. Purdue was just rumored, so people jump on a rumor like that. But it wouldn't have mattered if he had gone to Purdue. That gets interesting now, going to Syracuse. I know they lost a lot of production. I think I read 115th in returning production for Syracuse, but they were up and coming last season.
They were up and coming last season. They capitalized on being able to surprise a lot of people, and Kyle McCord very obviously had a career year and kind of provided the template for Steve Angeli that you could leave one of these super premium power programs like a Notre Dame or an Ohio State and potentially have immediate success at Syracuse. Jeff Nixon, I know a little bit, the Syracuse offensive coordinator, former Penn State guy. He's had a lot of NFL experience. They had the number one passing offense in all of major college football a year ago. That has to be appealing to Angeli.
Yes.
And he graduates he graduates with 2 years to play. But look, if he has a Kyle McCord type season, he may not need that second year to play because he would play himself into the NFL draft conversation at that point, or set himself up to also being potentially able to stay at Syracuse and get paid again, or transfer yet somewhere else and get a very lucrative payday. Now, I would note, and I was talking about this with some folks from the Irish Illustrated message boards this morning, the Syracuse schedule is much more difficult this fall than it was a year ago. Now, they had a very quality win against Miami, but I think they had an early season loss at home to Stanford. And we kind of know how Stanford dissolved and into nothing as the season wore on. But they open in Atlanta against Tennessee. That will be a compelling matchup because both teams will have new quarterbacks and nobody knows quite what to expect. And both teams are coming off of 10-win seasons. But they also have, I think, a road trip to Clemson very early, obviously a road trip to Miami and Notre Dame, a road trip to SMU, maybe a road trip to Pittsburgh as well. They've got North Carolina in there. I know they play at Georgia Tech. It's a very daunting schedule for Syracuse to even try to match what it did a year ago, let alone any hopes of exceeding it, especially as you noted, and I think Priester had as well, that Syracuse just lost tremendous production.
Well, I'm also curious too, because I believe Fran Brown, Syracuse coach, just named Ricky Collins the starter like a week or two ago, kind of declared it early, or like I believe Adam Rittenberg asked if Marcus Freeman wanted to do that yesterday at Notre Dame's press conference, but they actually did that, and now they went in the portal and got somebody else. So I'm kind of curious. And Collins had transferred from LSU, but I believe too, and gotten there in January. So it's kind of interesting. I'm wondering how those dynamics play out. Obviously, you're bringing in Jelly in. I assume he's going there because he expects to play. But that will be kind of curious how that plays out.
Another thing Freeman mentioned that I found interesting was they asked about the defensive and offensive line, starting with the defense, when he said he really likes their ends. And I think obviously the good health news we got, and we'll kind of wrap up with that on the injury front. If Botelho and Traore are back and in the fold, everyone likes Notre Dame's defensive ends because you have four Vipers that can play, because with Junior Tuihalamaka proved he can. We think Logan Thomas can. You have Bryce Young, Josh Burnham. The list goes on at end, and as he mentioned, it's about replacing production, not star power inside. They have five guys I think we all think can play inside. We'll see if Sevalana or Mukum can join that. I caught Marcus starting to list people, then he realized he had to list everybody because he was going to omit someone. Once you list like 8 guys at defensive tackle, I realized you're just listing everybody. But those were the kind of the question mark coming in was defensive line. Does Notre Dame need to spend? They clearly don't believe they needed to spend, other than in retention. They obviously have to spend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Drew.
Oh, yeah. I think I mean, unless you're going to get out Howard Cross caliber player coming in, somebody like that, then you feel very good about your depth, and why not stick with the guys who got here, and you see a lot of different pieces too. I think it's interesting. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before, but like Jared Dawson versus, Gabriel Rubio or Jason Onion, like you have a lot of different body types. Donovan Heinisch, like you can, not only do you have a lot of people to throw in, but you can kind of change it up and get guys who maybe can get under the offensive lineman a little better, and I think really challenge offensive interiors that way as well.
Yeah, and Eric Thomas had been chasing this some earlier in the week. Notre Dame potentially being involved with Bo Atkinson, the defensive edge from North Carolina, and there was a possibility of getting Atkinson on campus. Not sure the latest on that. Don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but I was told Ohio State has the most buzz there by a number of different people. Also was told very significantly that Atkinson's asking price is expected to be 7 figures, and obviously we've seen Notre Dame and you have to credit Notre Dame for this, wanting to reinvest in its own roster and believing in the players it has on its roster and trying to spend its money in that regard. So Marcus Freeman saying on Wednesday, look, if it made our team better, okay, but it has to make our team better and fit our culture, which again is a talking point that we've hammered home on this podcast now for multiple weeks.
I heard getting out of the car that he signed with Ohio State. So you're spot on. I believe that it was reported on ESPN when I was listening to Draft Talk. So really interesting because Rick Neuheisel, I don't want to too big of a tangent here, but Rick Neuheisel made a good point. Like he assumed when he went into the portal must be damaged goods or Bill Belichick didn't think he could play there. Well, Ohio State's signing him, so that means he can play at North Carolina. That was Rick Neuheisel's line, not mine. But I found that pretty interesting. So Ohio State not heavily involved in the portal, but when they do, they bring out the big guns. Finally, kind of wrapping up with Marcus Freeman, we did not get to talk about wide receivers. That was my question. I regret not getting that in quickly. Some people on our board were wondering when he named the 5 offensive linemen, well, does that mean since Lambert's hurt, that's the starting 5? To clarify, if you read our stories, and this might not have come across easily in transcripts, he was asked about the oddity that it is a veteran group that are not a bunch of fifth-year guys that have to leave the program. In other words, he has veteran linemen, but they're really young. They've only played either 1 year or in Jagas's case, and in honestly, if you kind of piece it all together, in Schroth's case, it's not even a full season of football. I know Billy Schroth is going to be a senior, but he has multiple half seasons there. Ashton Craig is 5 starts, I believe. If it's 4.5 games played under high leverage situations. So it's a strange Notre Dame line. Veterans, grizzled veterans, and they can all come back in 2026.
Yeah, I think that maybe Ashton Craig is around 7 career starts. I was trying to look that up real quickly, or maybe it's 6. He started the last 3 games of the 23 season, maybe, and then
Yeah, then
the
I think he
first
got hurt.
3
Yeah.
of the first 3 of the 24 season. So six starts, maybe six and a half meaningful appearances after he took over at halftime of the Clemson game after Zeke Correll was concussed and ineffective. And so, yeah, it's tremendous production. It's not only one of the deepest or more experienced offensive lines in the country, but as you note, T.O., it's absolutely one of the youngest, and yet it's full of really good talent as well. And then his what I think it is 4th program, so it's a lot.
Go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too that even the guys who are the least experienced, like in terms of games, like Jagasaw, like he started 2 bowl games in the national championship game, or at least started one and played in the other, and at different positions too. So we've seen you can kind of just throw him in, and he can kind of get the job done. And I mean, not only they're young, but they're also super talented. I mean, you're talking about a bunch of like 4-star players, or a guy even in Knapp's case, who I believe, you're winning the left tackle job at Notre Dame as a freshman for a reason, even if he was maybe a 3-star recruit by a lot of outlets. But and I also think going back to Lambert too, I mean, it'll be kind of interesting. I mean, with that, talking to Jagasaw this spring, like he talked about, like he's still now just getting back some of that strength he lost when he suffered his injury last August. Like he doesn't feel like he's still maybe in the weight room where he wants to be. So with Lambert also, I believe it was a labor room is slightly different, but like he just, came off his freshman year, was just kind of building up in the weight room. Like there could be delays that make it really hard for him to be ready early on, because like even if he can still do some footwork drills and stuff now, he needed that strength probably more than some of the other guys he's competing with, and he's going to have to rebuild it.
We're in a new world all because of one run to the championship game where people don't care if someone's ready by September 1st anymore. Everyone's like, oh, he'll be fine. He'll just be fine for the stretch run when we need him for the final 9 games of the season into late January.
Yeah, and again, of all the recent rule changes, sorry, Tio, of all the recent rule changes, allowing guys to come back and play in the postseason and not burn a red shirt is maybe one of the most user-friendly rules that the
Oh, yeah.
NCAA has had in several years. I apologize for cutting off the timing there.
Can you imagine if they did not allow the redshirt rule with it having to play 4 playoff games? How the dire straits rosters would be in at this point. That was some foresight a few years ago that finally affected Notre Dame.
Yeah.
There appears to be a stay of execution in a ruling that we have talked about now for the past 5 months. Yesterday, U.S. District Judge Claudia Wilken declined to grant final approval of the proposed deal meant to resolve House versus NCAA antitrust class action suit. But number one, really the biggest part of this was going from 120 to 105. Could be 105 scholarships, could be 1 scholarship, but you could only have 105 players on your practice field instead of 120. We are obviously arguing that that is hard to implement in 1 year, and why walk-ons could simply not be grandfathered in for 1 year, if not 2, but certainly 1 year. I think that's fair enough. JB, you've been all over this, but it looks like there's a surprise ruling here that surprised a lot of head coaches nationwide, and there's about 1 week left to resolve it, right?
Yeah, I mean, on Monday, I literally read aloud a text message from a active sitting FBS GM who said we expect to go to 105 by August. And that was a number of people. I had late last night a guy whose program, he's senior AD for football, guy whose program was consistently ranked in the top 20. So his program was in the CFP rankings when they were first released, and he just texted me, "What an absolute mess." And I wrote back and said, I don't know anybody who really has planned for a 120-man roster going into August. That I don't know anybody either. It's been crazy. But now, Judge Wilken noted April 7th that she had strong hesitancies against that. But the two sides, the NCAA and the defendants, or the defendants and the settlement side, had said that, well, but we agreed to this, so you should approve it because both sides have already agreed to it. And Judge Wilken in her ruling on Wednesday saying, just because I said I was granting preliminary approval does not mean, or should not have been interpreted, that I would approve everything exactly as is. And so she has listened. She had athletes from multiple sports in her courtroom at the 1st of April to hear their testimony about how much it could potentially impact them to not be grandfathered in, to lose their roster spot immediately. We've talked a lot about football, how it would have meant, somewhere between 11 or 12 cuts for Notre Dame if it was to go into effect by August to be down to 105. Baseball is another significant sport. You were talking about going from a 40-man roster down to 34. Now you were going to be able to award some more scholarships, just like in football, you technically can award more scholarships, but you shrink the overall roster size. And it was that way across myriad sports. So she has really dug in there. There's all the leadership meeting in Dallas this week, or in Frisco this week, going over things. That's why we saw on Monday, and we wrote about it at Football Scoop, the NCAA preliminarily announced the approval and removal of some 150 different rules related to the expectation that the House settlement would be enacted, because it had to do with athlete compensation. It outlined that a student athlete who was going to receive part of the revenue share had to be a full-time enrolled student at his or her university on his or her campus. It outlined that they would be able to digitally track payments to student athletes, so the student athletes could make sure they were getting paid on time, and so that there could be third-party auditing, making sure that student athletes were being paid appropriately, not too little and not too much. So it's another step closer. It's what most people have wanted. We've always said that, like, people would like to see it phased in. There's nobody out there cheering for 15 guys to lose their spot as walk-ons on a roster, just as, like we heard Marcus Freeman say on Wednesday, we would fund 95 scholarships. That's something we've reported on this podcast now for several weeks, that Notre Dame would be at 95 scholarships moving forward, regardless of the 105 or 120. So a lot of nuance to it. A lot of people confused today, last night. A lot of players breathing a bit of a sigh of relief. So maybe it is more gradually phased in. They have 2 weeks to come back with a working solution. They don't have 2 weeks to come back and say, okay, we'll keep it at 120 in perpetuity, or we'll keep it at 40 in perpetuity, or whatever. They have 2 weeks to come back and say, okay, we see why you want to keep it this, but then by next year, and what I've always been told is that it could be, you could look at it like a 3-year thing, where if it's 120 next year, then it might go down to 115 or even 112, and then get to 105 or 110, and then 105 the ensuing years. So there are people who already have a stair-step plan, a stair-step projected plan in place to navigate this. But for the walk-on parents, and I heard from some yesterday, a lot of relief.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too that you said it caught some, a lot of programs by surprise, but I guess we're all used to, like, I mean, I know the SEC, it seemed like they were on the side of, we wanted it to get to the 105 without grandfathering anyone in, and we're kind of used to, like, what that conference wants is kind of what college football does. They obviously have a lot of sway in terms of, like, what we've seen with the playoff and possibly expanding it again and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of makes sense they're caught by surprise, but at the end of the day, like, this is what the judge wants, and that the process isn't going through the usual channels. I think it's the right call, even if it maybe disrupts some things for programs. I think this is a little unrelated, but like even back in the day, like I've written a story on Stanley Kovaleski, who where the South Bend Cubs play back in the day. He was a spitball pitcher, and at one point the MLB wanted to ban the spitball, but they grandfathered in like 14 or 15 players, including him, to still do this thing that it was illegal for everybody else. And I don't know. There's precedent for that type of thing for sports. Like if somebody has their livelihood or potential reliant on this thing or getting into school or whatever, like why would you take it away? So
Every Mets fan for the mid '80s is now angry at Mike Scott. That was grandfathered in for that scuffing because he was the only one that was allowed to do that to kill him. I actually, to wrap up on this, my favorite thing she said was any disruption that may occur is a problem with the defendants and NCAA member schools' own making. That's true. I mean, just because you say like, nah, we're gonna do this. This is how we're gonna handle it. It's not necessarily true. So, before we go to segment two, Drew, you were
Well,
out on our
yeah,
podcast. Go ahead, JB.
oh, sorry. I just wanted to say, well, and look, it's not like corporate people, so to speak, corporate people of college athletics were sitting around going, how can we damage the sport and ruin things for up to 15 players on football programs or up to a half dozen players in baseball or softball or what have you. It was all related to the money. It's always been related to the money. So the revenue share, if it enacted, again, if House settlement passes after these 2 weeks, it starts July 1st, and that's $20.5 million that, again, every athletic department, that's new money every athletic department has to fund. So if they can't raise $1 million right now and moving forward or carve it out or have a way to generate it, then they've got to make cuts. And so there will be unintended consequences from this. But that boiled down to that extra 15 players in football was an extra 15 players that they were examining the cost. And so again, it sucked because Notre Dame is a great walk-on school. Nebraska has had a really good walk-on program. There've been some notable ones, obviously at Georgia Tech and some other places like that, but it was never like just a capricious, oh, okay, you want this, we're going to give this money, you have to reduce your rosters. No, they went hand in hand. The money was forcing and is forcing the roster reduction whenever it occurs.
Drew, we talked a little bit about the draft, and if too bad we're not having a Friday evening podcast because that's when I think we could talk some more about Notre Dame's draft prospects. But really quickly, two of Notre Dame's 10 best players at their positions in the history of the program, we believe will go on day two. Xavier Watson, Benjamin Morrison. Benjamin Morrison because of injury. I know you listened Monday, but I'm going to read off the players anyway, and you tell us day one, day two, day three. Obviously, the only day one options would be Watson, Morrison. I assume you
yeah,
go with the day two.
day two for both.
Kaiser, Evans, and Mills.
Day three.
Leonard.
Late day three, I almost kind of expect him to go undrafted, just from the standpoint that I mean I kind of maybe I'm a little too thinking a little bit too much about Sam Hartman's situation, who I think probably thought would get drafted, but then I think at some point like your agent, if you're going to go that late, your agent starts working for you not to get drafted because
Right.
he had a guaranteed like $250,000 deal with the Commanders as soon as the draft ended. And if you have a favorable situation like that, he was like on the roster or the sideline most of the season too. Like that's what your agent's going to start pushing for. So I think with a guy like him, if he's going to go like late sixth round or later, like I think his desire actually switches to pushing for that situation.
Does either Bo Collins or Howard Cross sneak in?
I agree with Bryce. I think Bo Collins sneaks in. No, hardly any mock drafts have him getting drafted, but I just feel like he interviews well, like the tools are there, and at worst case scenario, you get like a fifth wide receiver who's good at special teams and a very willing special teams player. And I think again, later in the draft, like that might be something that teams are more likely to swing for, a good culture guy who, if he makes the roster, can contribute in some ways that are meaningful.
Looking to upgrade your wardrobe? Founded by Notre Dame alum Go Wang, you've seen ESQ's custom clothing on the player walk and all of your favorite players and coaches. With more than a decade of making the best bespoke clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your very best. From a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt, or bomber jacket, or that perfect tuxedo for wedding season, check out esqclothing.com and book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention Irish Illustrated and get 10% off your entire purchase. That's esqclothing.com. We'll be back with segment two Burning Up the Boards. Welcome back to segment 2, Burning Up the Boards. Our first question is from CMU Pens fan. How much does it speak to the culture Marcus Freeman has built at Notre Dame that the necessary transfers are going to happen at the last moment and guys are not fleeing like rats on a ship?
I think, I mean, it definitely speaks to the culture too. Which, I mean, just Notre Dame, the way they navigate the transfer portal in general. Like you're not going to, they're not loading up on guys, so guys aren't just losing their jobs and stuff like that too. So I think that speaks to part of how they're doing it. Like if you think you can stick around and maybe fight for a position because they're not just gonna like pull in an older player over you or somebody else. Like I think that helps. I think too. I mean, I think some of them also can get, maybe this isn't speaking to the culture as much, but I think sometimes they can get a little used to like Notre Dame dictating how they announce things and they kind of just go along with it because that's what they've been doing for the last several years. So if Notre Dame wants to like work on a graphic with them or whatever. So I think there are other
It'll
factors.
be out on April 25th, guys.
Yeah.
I just can't quite finish it. About 5 p.m.
I think sometimes it's that, but I also think too, like, I mean, just the transparency, even how Marcus Freeman discussed it in the press conference yesterday, where he was like, we've been honest, like, we might have to make this decision. Like, this is the last day you have to do it, but like, and we totally respect that if you want to do it. I think the fact that Freeman is so transparent and he's not coy with them doesn't lead them to making some type of like, backhanded decision or trying to they're more willing to also go along with some of those things they want because they're being so upfront with them, and I think that really is important, especially you look at a guy like Angeli. Like that's a guy, ultimately you've seen what he can do in an emergency situation. It would have been in your best interest to keep him here until the fall, just in case, even if he's running third, but like you don't want to do that to the guy, and they didn't. So
What I would say, and I've hammered home culture. I talked about Marcus Freeman and the Notre Dame program culture on Monday and how healthy it is. We heard Marcus mention it, not only about departing transfers, but potential additions to the portal on Wednesday. And I referenced that in the first segment. But over the past month, I've done all access visits with 4 different programs, including USC, Central Michigan, Ohio U, and Austin P. And at least 3 of those, maybe all 4. Actually, all 4 of those, there was comments to me from either staff or assistant coaches or people like that about the job Marcus Freeman is doing at Notre Dame, about the culture that they played with, particularly Ohio U's coaches and Central Michigan's new coaching staff that actually just came down and visited with Notre Dame's coaches last week, and spent some extra time with them. They all were struck by the culture at Notre Dame, and they all marveled at how he's been able to shape that culture and how increasingly rare it is. And again, look no further than my alma mater, the University of Tennessee, and they're coming off a playoff run, and they've had a number of players that went into the portal. They nearly lost Iamaliava and their top wide receiver into the portal in December immediately after a playoff run. I think they had a projected or a contending starting safety who entered the transfer portal today, and they've been out of spring camp for 10 days or so now. So again, the culture at Notre Dame is very real. That starts absolutely at the top, first and foremost, with Marcus Freeman. I think it also starts or trickles down and has a lot to do with a bunch of egoless assistant coaches. And I don't know that we can put enough credit on that, because Marcus can set that example, but if he doesn't have chief lieutenants beneath him who carry out that example, it's really hard. And instead, these players see the culture lived, I think, really 1 through 10 on the coaching staff and beyond to all the other positions.
I'm more impressed with the spring portal's silence up to this point than it will happen after true exit interviews and Thursday and Friday. Because in December, I thought of 2 things. You're in a playoff run, so when they ask you something that's totally reasonable, you might be willing to go along with that. And number 2, you could dangle NIL in title. You could dangle NIL in December. It's kind of hard to do that right now in the spring. I mean, that's pretty much locked up at this point. You've been paid or you're not going to get paid. Your semester is ending. So I'm really impressed that they waited. And of course, Steve Angeli, I think he had an earlier exit interview, or he was able to figure it out properly right away. And he had to jump on it, as Drew said, because now he's about to enter some type of quarterback competition, just not as intense as it was in South Bend. We have a 2-parter here for Steve Angeli's former wide receivers. Ever to Excel asks, do you think any Notre Dame wide receiver breaks 45 catches next season? And from Do Your Job 23, Might be Tommy Reese listening in. What wide receiver outside of Fields, Greathouse, Faison, and Pauling makes the biggest impact this season? You
I
guys
think
go
I'm
this one first. Yeah, I probably talked about part two yesterday.
Yeah, I think we're at this point with part one, I guess, with 45 catches. I think is reason to be disappointed if they don't have at least two guys get there this year. I know O'Malley was talking before we jumped on that it's been a while since they've had, I think since 2018 since they've had multiple guys
Yep.
eclipse that mark. But I think if you even just look at two of the transfers they bought in with Fields and Pauling, like Fields has gone 55 catches last year, 58 the year before. He got 58 in 2023 when they also had Malik Washington, who was a six-round pick and had 110 catches and 1,400 yards on the team too. So he clearly shows he can do it even with other talented players on the team. He doesn't have to be the only option to get that kind of production. And then Pauling, 2 years last year had 42 catches, the year before 74. I think we've also been high on what Greathouse has shown, especially at the end of last year. Faison, if he's healthy, has a lot of potential. And then, just in terms of the biggest impact out of those guys, I still like Burris. Like, I'm really impressed with just his ability to get open. I mean, obviously he's the father or son. His father played in the NFL for a long time. He just, even though he's not as nowhere near the size of his dad, he still shows that ability to like just know how to get open. Like I think there's a big skill in that, and I think some of the issues with like drops and things like that, he'll have more time to clean up with, and I just think there's a role for somebody like that on this team.
Yeah,
If
I
he
think
was, it'd be my fault. If he was the size of his dad, the NIL payment next year would be astronomical for Elijah Burris. Go ahead, JB.
yeah. Um, I, I like the projection of Fields and Greathouse to be at 45 or more apiece. The Fields has been so productive, and a lot of times he was the only. Well, especially 2 years ago, he was really Virginia's only true weapon, and yet still found ways to make catches. He still got very involved in the offense. Now they threw it more than Notre Dame has typically thrown it, but I think Notre Dame is moving forward with a willingness to try and have more downfield passing and be able to spread it around a little bit more. So I think for me it would be Fields and Greathouse. It took Greathouse 16 games last year
Yep.
to get to 42 catches, but I do think he can get there without Notre Dame having to play 16 games this year. And beyond that, who would be the impact guy at the wide receiver position? I still probably go Micah Gilbert or Elijah Burris. In talking with people after the Blue Gold game, Burris had a really strong spring, and we saw flashes of it in back-to-back Saturdays on the 5th and the 12th. But he showed up a lot more than that over the balance of spring.
I think it's worth noting 2018, the year Drew mentioned when they had three guys go over 45, it was the last time they were really focused on a three wide receiver set, in part because they only had one healthy tight end most of that year. When Cole Kmet got hurt, it was Alize Mack. In 2019, kind of splitting hairs, they were close. Cole Kmet and Chris Fink were both just under it and probably would have gone over it if Chase Claypool wasn't such a dominant player there. But yeah, if you think about it, like 2020, 2022, 2023, 2024, only one player in those years got over 45. It was Michael Mayer in 2022. Of course, he did it in 2021 as well with Austin, but 45 catches isn't a lot. Someone's got to get there. I just think that the offense will dictate that they get there more so this year than they did in the past. From Eisen Prince
And
19.
that year,
Go ahead, JB.
yeah, I was just going to say, and think about how Herculean the effort was of Michael Mayer to get to 45 catches and 22 with the bad quarterback play that Notre Dame had that year.
Yeah, he kind of had to. Otherwise, they wouldn't have any points. That would have been. And the great John Stott would have been the team MVP instead of just September's MVP. From Eisen Prince 19. This spring, you've underscored the leadership vacuum caused by the departures of Kaiser, Watts, Mills, Morrison, and Leonard. That is a vacuum. Next year's roster is undoubtedly talented, but it seems to lack seasoned leaders who can command a unit and solve problems on the field, as Freeman said. So how will Freeman develop leaders between now and August? And how and when might the turnover in leadership have a real impact on the 2025 season?
Well, Notre Dame has a number of things to develop leadership in the offseason. And we heard Marcus Freeman on Wednesday say that guys are coming up on getting about 3 to 3.5 weeks of time off. Remember a few years ago, that's when Isaiah Foskey went and studied internationally and did some fashion stuff. Maybe in Italy. I can't remember exactly where off the top of my head. I know he was international student during that time. I think Kaiser has also maybe done some international studies in the past during this 15-day window or 3.5 week window, whatever it is, a 15-day course. So after that, they get back in, they start working with Lauren Lando, but they have a bunch of building stuff. And Notre Dame encourages those guys to basically have de facto OTAs, organized team activities, and you'll see that. And that's when the summer leadership to me is born. Lauren Lando, we'll see who begins to provide leadership kind of naturally in his conditioning programs, and then he can relay that information either directly to the players or directly to Marcus Freeman to encourage them to grow that leadership. So that's where I see that happening and the timeline for that happening. As to when the leadership will have to show itself, I think the leadership will have to show itself Sunday, August 31st inside Miami Gardens, Hard Rock Stadium. I think that atmosphere is going to be pretty insane for Notre Dame. Nothing that didn't navigate over the balance of the 24 playoff run, but I do think that leadership will be needed. You will need your leadership that night, especially if you have some early adversity and you're going to be going into there with a first-time starting quarterback and a number of new starters everywhere else. So you're going to have some adversity. Your leadership will have to show itself literally from the first game.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like their first two games of the season are the ones where they're going to potentially be challenged the most. So you got to have those leaders developed right away. I think we've seen, kind of going back to the quarterbacks and wanting to simulate pressure in the fall with that two-man quarterback battle. Like Marcus Freeman, I think, has always wanted to put them in pressure, put them in situations where it really challenges them to like think, and kind of rise to the moment. And I think they're already starting to do that. And he talks about building trust a lot, building trust with your teammates. And I think we even saw that in the spring with even like a guy like Leonard Mort feeling like these early enrollees who he's been on campus for, a semester longer than he already sees himself as a leader. And I think it helps when you have a lot of guys who did it on such a big stage too. Even though Leonard Moore is, a freshman, like you can also see what he did against Ohio State and Penn State and Georgia in the playoffs. And I think that is going to carry a lot of weight and gives the guys a lot of extra experience to rely on. I mean, if you look at just what they had in January of this year, that's more work than they usually get, extra work they usually get than in a whole spring. So that's experience that I think will help and ultimately, make a difference. But I agree. It's going to be, especially I look at the defensive line, like you're losing two captain, or I guess Cross wasn't a captain, but two really experienced guys there. And then the guys coming back, like you have Botello and Onye and Rubio, who all have, either, in Botello's case, he's not the most vocal guy, or the other two like have been away from the program for a little bit over the last 2 years. Not that they haven't, done really great things to get back, but who's going to fill that leadership void? Because the older guys there aren't the people we'd gravitate towards, like a Riley Mills.
Our next question from CP11. Given Chris Ash's recent NFL stint where they flop cornerbacks, is there any chance of flopping Moore and Gray to different sides of the field, especially when a team is a true number one wide receiver a la Jeremiah Smith? Or is that only plausible in the NFL because of the slower game pace and the closer hashes? T.O., you've had some good stuff on this over the course of spring and have really dug in on, so let's open with you.
I hope I ask Coach Mickens this every spring and fall, and he smiles and gives me the same answer. They cross-train all the time, of course. He mentions you have to be able to play boundary field because of up-tempo offenses. But when I kind of asked Mickens again, digging in, is do you continue to do that as much during the season, during preparations? He says, well, at that point, you really like to hone in on who's boundary and field. So it's tough to do. I am with most people on this. I will bring this up one last time. And I know it was Leonard Moore's first game, but Leonard Moore started at field corner, not boundary, where he ended up replacing Benjamin Morrison. He started at field corner in place of Christian Gray against Louisville. It's the only touchdown of relevance he gave up. He said after the game he did not feel comfortable at all playing field corner. He had not touched field corner since August camp. He was thrown in there anyway, and that gives you a little insight as to Jaden Mickey transferring right away because Leonard Moore was put at that spot ahead of Jaden Mickey, and Moore had not been playing there. Christian Gray was kind of laughing like, dude can do anything. But yeah, he didn't like it so much because you're not used to it. I just think the boundary field situation in the college game makes it way harder than people think. I'll also say that if the corners were senior year Benjamin Morrison and senior year Leonard Moore, they could have decided whoever wanted to cover anybody at that point. But it's not that simple like we make it out to be as fans.
Yeah, I agree. I think that just as CP11 reference, like the difference in the hashes really changes the dimension so much and what their responsibilities are in terms of, the boundary. I mean, you have, maybe a smaller area in terms of like what you're doing from a coverage standpoint, but you also have to be willing to like make, solo tackles a little better and stuff like that. So I think just that spacing does change it a lot where they really are different positions more than it might seem.
From Terry Benedict.
Yeah,
What? Oh, go ahead,
as
baby.
noted, we've heard them say that they cross train. We've also heard them, even Marcus Freeman over the course of this spring, kind of obliquely reference the Jeremiah Smith and the end of the Ohio State game. And we've heard Notre Dame and been told repeatedly from Chris Ash, from the defensive backs, linebackers, safeties. We've heard from everyone this spring they've implemented a lot more zone capability into their package, their defensive package, than they've had in previous years. So I think that shows you that Notre Dame by no means is burying its head in the sand on this issue and is enhancing its defensive playbook in case it needs to encounter this situation again, I would say.
Very quickly, too, and I'm glad to be right once on these film analysis. Leonard Moore mentioned, I need to work on covering slants. We wrote that in a X Things to Say film review because he's a dominant force when it's outside the hash. Just Leonard Moore. You're a little worried about Jeremiah Smith on a slant or a sluggo on 3rd and 11 when you're playing to the field side for the first time, and I don't know how long either. It might not have been a great situation for Leonard Moore either. Obviously, we have anecdotal evidence that it wasn't for Christian Gray, and Christian Gray did not have a great end of the season like Moore did. But it's a tough situation, and Drew gets to it. Like the amount of field to cover is just a little different in the college game. From Terry Benedict, what can and can't the quarterbacks do this offseason to work with the wide receivers to develop chemistry? JB, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, they can do everything except truly simulate a game and have that raucous environment, whether it's home or away, that you have to answer the call for pressure. But they can organize as much as they want to. They can get throwing sessions. They can do almost full 11 on 11 stuff. And Notre Dame has had some leaders do that in recent years. They've had some guys organize not just the 7-on-7, but they've had team and player-led walkthroughs where the coaches weren't even around, which, again, I think is significant to the type of players and character that Notre Dame recruits. Again, also underscores Marcus Freeman's culture that he has in the program. But in terms of what they can do everything except truly simulate a game. That's the best way I know how to answer that question. There's absolutely everything they can do. They can have guys over to their house. They can take guys out to dinner. They can do all the stuff in the IAC. They can do other stuff on campus together. They can get guys in the film room together and say, hey, we're going to watch this all 11 film and I'll be there. We expect all you guys to be there if you expect to play and help us win football games this fall.
Yeah, and I think kind of along what you just touched on, JB, is like last year we saw Riley Leonard invite, a bunch of the wide receivers down to Alabama with him, which I think, O'Malley, you were the first one to like report on that story
That was
last.
weird.
Yeah,
Well,
through.
JB was reporting on it, but I was talking to Bo Collins and he said, I'm at Riley Leonard's house. I was like, oh, cool. Let's get this story out as fast as we can.
That's right. So they could do stuff like that. So maybe, I mean, I think with it not obviously being one guy, I'd be curious how they worked it out. But I mean, obviously it's CJ Carr, Ann Arbor's not, is maybe a 3-hour drive from here, where he's from in Saline, Michigan. So maybe they even do something like that where obviously Minchie, I assume, would be involved in that case. But yeah, there's a lot of different things they can do even away from the university that they can start building some of that chemistry in, which you really want with a guy like Fields, who might be your, we see as your best receiver. They got to start developing that chemistry because they didn't have it this spring.
I'm going to go to
one thing I would like to add here very quickly is that I forgot to mention when I was just talking, CJ Carr already showed some of this even last summer. Last August, right as Notre Dame was opening preseason camp, CJ Carr and his mom went to Costco and bought this massive gargantuan food and then hosted a cookout any Notre Dame's freshmen and new and any other players that wanted to come. And so we've already seen some of this innate leadership of CJ Carr and company running the grill at his place and hosting a cookout for a number of the players last August.
From Any Davis 2, KVA is leagues ahead of the competition in terms of athleticism and instinct. That's interesting. He might not be leagues ahead, but I agree he's very good. What does he need to do to become de facto linebacker number one, Drew?
I mean, I think the biggest thing, just even kind of, I mean, we're all very high on him. I mean, just the physical potential, like you mentioned, in athleticism, but he still needs to become a better tackler and more reliable in coverage. He missed almost 18% of his tackles last year. He gave up 2 touchdowns, according to Pro Football Focus, and 25 and a half yards per reception.
I put one of
Ironically,
those on Morrison, to be fair, but yes,
okay,
that was
yeah.
involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the NIU game, maybe.
Yeah.
But the only person who did worse than that, ironically, is Jaden Mickey last fall. So I think they're just little things, like little mistakes that he needs to clean up, and I think we're all certainly capable of. I mean, at the end of the day, he still kind of got thrown in, dealt with some injuries last year, and still performed exceedingly well.
Yeah, To, do you have his snap count handy for last year?
Yeah,
Or
he was right there with the
he
other
still played
guys.
significantly.
Yeah, he was directly
Yeah,
in line with the other
exactly.
guys.
Like
The only
26.
he missed a little more than Sneed and Bowen simply because he didn't play most of Army, all of USC, all of who they played home, Virginia before USC, and all of Indiana. So he might have been ahead of those four had that happened. He was a little bit behind him though. I love the
Yeah, I
guy.
think
I think he's gonna be
maybe
great.
the number that comes to mind is 20, 26 snaps per game. Well, and look, let's not forget what we've touched on this spring. We've seen Notre Dame start training him some off the edge, and it might have been Drew who asked KVA about it a couple of weeks ago. I can't recall exactly, but he was asked how much he likes that, and he very much likes that ability to roam around a little bit and be a guy that Notre Dame can use off the edge in some rush packages. And he's 6'3", up to 231, I think, or down to 231 because he was listed at 240 last year. And yeah, Andy Davis is right. His instincts are good. I've been talking about his instincts since I saw him in January of 24 down at the All-American game in San Antonio, and just the way he flows to the ball. So he'll start plenty of games. He's going to play a ton of snaps for Notre Dame, and he will be, I think he'll grow into a very indispensable component of Notre Dame's defense this fall.
So we got the first question is future Domer dad. Who's the best guess on who you think will go into the portal? And then a related question from Bob Cooter 55. With this being the last year for an NIL free-for-all and colleges being able to give unlimited amounts of money to players, shouldn't ND go all out and buy the best 1 or 2 spring portal additions? I know you don't want to mess up team chemistry or piss off the current roster, but ND might be a player or two away from being the national title favorite.
I think they would go directly into the portal, as Marcus Freeman said, at the right position. Wide receiver is interesting because from the outside, we all feel like they need a wide receiver, but we like their first four. I go to Denbrock saying how much they need to improve too. So I'm not sure. What do you guys think of bringing in a wide receiver that would be obviously wide receiver number 4 or 5? Because right now we're saying the freshman Burris or Micah Gilbert, who missed all of spring practice. Would that give them a bump? I mean, if they're not going to go, they love their rush ends. You're not going to get a guy that gives you that big of a bump at defensive tackle in the spring. You're not going to get an offensive lineman to come to Notre Dame at this point. You can't get a running back to join. I don't know what you're looking for really in this. What would have worked out for them other than a wide receiver position?
Yeah, if this was, you know, fantasy draft, then the questioner makes a good point. JBC makes a good point. Don't you just throw caution to the wind and go out and sign a big deal, a big giant deal, and get whomever you can to best enhance your roster? And Notre Dame, we heard Marcus Freeman, as you alluded to. He said, like, if we find some guy that fits, that makes our team better, but also helps our locker room, we'll go do that. But when you look at this Notre Dame team, like, okay, Anthony Knapp's coming back from injury and he endured a lot as a true freshman playing left tackle. You're not going to go sign a 1-year NFL left tackle in this portal window right now. Beyond that, I don't think you're going to go sign a Michael Williams or a whomever you have as your number one defensive tackle in this upcoming NFL draft in this spring portal window. So uh, I don't think Notre Dame will you just have a better perspective on Notre Dame being perceived as maybe a little bit too frugal in recent or in not too long ago. I don't get that sense now. I think Notre Dame would find the money and spend the money if it truly believed it could go upgrade its roster. I just don't know that it's going to be there. And then specific to the wide receiver position, there's not a Jeremiah Smith in the portal that you can go get. And then a guy like that who's accustomed to getting so many balls. If you come in and you pay a bunch of money to bring in this number one wide receiver who you know is going to play 1 year for you and then be picked in the top 60 picks of next year's NFL draft, how does that dynamic work with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, Eli Rared and Malachi Field and all the other people that you've brought in and began to work with over the course of this spring to be central components of your 25 offense?
Our final question, Low-Key Scott. All right, I'm going to read this position group off to you guys. Based on each player's presumptive 2025 season, how many players from this list do you think will declare for the draft in 2026? The offensive linemen that will be seniors or that will be draft eligible are Strouth, Jagusa, and Wagner. I am at none that will declare for the draft next year. Jagusa hasn't played enough football.
I agree. None of those three.
I think depending on the year he has, I could see one of the three. I would think Billy Strouth. He would be my most likely. I think ESPN's already had him as a way too early preseason 2025 All-American. I think he's really freaking good. You know, Emil Wagner probably still will not have played enough football, even though he's played more than Jagasaw. So I think those guys would probably come back for one more year apiece, especially given that should be significant revenue share by that time. But I'll go with one of the three. That's my prediction. And then if you pin me down to pick one specific person beyond that, I would say Billy Strouth. But I'll go one out of three.
Defensive line, he includes Tui Halamaka, but I will point out for listeners, Tui Halamaka will be exhausting his 4 years of eligibility this year. He played from the outset as a freshman. So the draft eligible guys are Burnham and Traore. I'm going to say they both got to come back, but Traore certainly would have been able to go had he not been injured, is where I lean.
Yeah, it's hard to see. I mean, he kind of jumped out of the gate last year and kind of put up a lot of numbers. He's just going to be coming back to full form. And if he doesn't put together an entire season where he looks like at least a day two pick, because you're not coming out early, especially in this era where you can get paid in college, to be a day four pick or day three pick as a junior. So I agree that I don't think any of them will come, but Boubacar Traore certainly has the talent to be an NFL player.
Yeah, I would just say Boubacar Traore I would consider most likely among that field. I'm not predicting it, but if we've heard how on schedule he is, we've heard just yesterday Marcus Freeman say no limitations, full go for the duration of summer. If he opens next year with the way he was flashing last year in the first month of the season, and you've got a primetime game to open the season at Miami, you'll have what figures to be a primetime game at home against Texas A&M 2 weeks later. If he starts flashing in that first month of the season, then Boubacar Traore, I think, will have a great decision to make by year's end.
Linebackers, it is Jalen Sneed, a senior, and Osbury and Bowen are true juniors, so they'd be going early. I think Jalen Sneed will leave Notre Dame next year.
Yeah, I agree. Sneed would be the one that I can't see coming back. I mean, I'd hate to rely on my memory, but I feel like even when Marcus Freeman discussed him, he said Jalen wanted to come back for his final year of college football. So I don't think they're even trying to dispel the fact that they've worked hard to keep him here for 4 years. And I think once he has his degree and another season of presumably playing a significant role, he's going to be off to the NFL.
Agreed.
Adon Schuler is the safety that's available for this, reasonably, that would leave early for the draft. With a improved season, let's say improved season after last year, what do you guys say?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think if he improves on last year with his physical traits, he's probably a top 40 pick, and maybe he's inside the top 30.
I'm gonna say yes. I'll be curious. I mean, it's just so hard as a safety. I think he might do. I would bet he would do it. I I think there's definitely a chance you're right, John, but I kind of also think like that's really hard to be that high of a pick at that position. But he does, I mean, especially as he works more on his coverage skills, like that could be something that really helps him too.
I think he'll bet on himself and go after if he has a really good year and is healthy, although he is making a healthy living at present for Notre Dame football as well. Jadarian Price is a senior. I'm going to go ahead and say I will tell him to leave if he doesn't because you got to go.
Yeah, only so much tread on the tire. We know he'll test well. We know he'll interview well. Um, and I don't think it's as
Marcus
clear
Freeman will
cut.
tell him to leave because you've got to be good to the people that he's a running back and you're a senior and you got to go.
I,
Okay.
I'd be curious if on the other hand though, if Notre Dame could potentially pay him enough to make it reasonable for him to stay and I mean, just at a position where there's not as much value, you're not guaranteed to, I don't know. I kind of think, especially if Love even takes a line, you know, has even a little bigger role next year, like it could make sense for him to stick around and especially we'll see what happens with that rest of the room. But if it's not like Notre Dame's going to wear him down in another year necessarily. Like they rotate that room well, so we'll kind of see how that plays out. But I'm kind of leaning towards staying, which I feel silly saying, but that's kind of how I feel.
He's a better draft prospect than Josh Adams, but I feel the same reason I said Josh Adams would leave as a true junior because you got to go when you have that much tread on your tire, and he had the ruptured Achilles as well.
True.
Tight end Eli Raridan, and we'll get into this a little later. Potential eligibility, but he is a true senior. He played 5 full games prior to injury, regular season games as a freshman. He played too many as a he played 7 as a or 6 as a sophomore, and of course all of last year.
Yeah, I think Eli Raridan goes, especially if he stays healthy all year, because that's been such a bugaboo for him. And then we know how well he closed the season last year. It was a very long big touchdown catch at USC, had some other key moments. I think he's getting married this spring. I've been talking for years how much, so he's got some family considerations there moving forward. Been talking for years how much I like Eli, but also how much I defer to Jason Garrett and how much he gushed about Eli Raridan a couple of years ago out on the practice field. And so, with all of that in mind, I think if Eli stays healthy and has a good year, he does go because I do think Notre Dame could appeal and an extra year of eligibility for him because he just played those 5 games in 2022. And I don't even know that he started any of those games. He just appeared in 5 games
Yeah, they
before
had Mayer.
suffering the
Yeah.
ACL. Was that the BYU game that he suffered the ACL tear? I can't
Wasn't it
remember
after the
which
week
game.
of practice after that? I thought it happened during practice, but it was after. It was
Maybe
BYU
so.
was involved in there. Yeah, they're in my mind.
Yeah, yeah.
And then
Yeah.
go ahead, Drew.
Oh, I say yeah, I agree. I think even just like the kind of the breakaway speed we've seen him starting to utilize in practice this spring, like I think he's going to show some things that NFL scouts are really going to be intrigued by finally.
Finally, Jaden Greathouse is a true junior.
I'm going to say he'll be back. I mean, I think we saw him do a lot of really impressive things at the end of last year, but I don't know that he has the um, athletic testing ability that he's going to feel like he can go bet on himself and really show well at the NFL Combine or anything. And I just with a guy like Malachi Fields coming in, like I'm not sure he's going to get a ton of a copious amount of targets to really put up the production he would need to leave early.
Yeah, I would think that Greathouse is more likely to return. We just opened earlier in this podcast talking about um, whether Notre Dame would have 2 guys with 45 catches next year, and we mentioned Jaden Greathouse in that mold. But 45 catches is not going to make him a top 50 draft pick, but it would give him a lot to build on. It would help Notre Dame pay him more for 26, and then it would let Jaden Greathouse know, okay, I can get more from Notre Dame. I can come back, and I might be able to play my way into a top 50 pick. So I'll agree with you on that, Drew.
I lean on Greathouse coming back, but I think he'll probably be smart enough to look at the wide receiver draft. I think it's good every year nowadays, though. Everybody plays wide receiver. But if you look at the wide receiver draft for 2026 versus 2027, will probably go into his line of thinking. Hopefully, he has a decision to make because that would have been silly to talk about during the Georgia game before the Penn State heroics happened. That's it for this episode of Irish Illustrated Insider. We will be back on Monday. The NFL draft will have concluded. We figure 6 to 8 Notre Dame players drafted. A little bit lingering portal conversation because someone's going to enter that portal, JB. And of course, then we have these summer months to discuss the roster and the trap game. That's going to happen, right? Coming up soon, we start talking about trap games even in April, or do we wait until May for that? Regardless, until then, for Drew Mentok of Irish Illustrated, John Bryce of Football Scoop, I'm Tim O'Malley. Thank you for listening to this episode of Irish Illustrated Insider.